Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so when and where were you born?
I was born in 1930, December 1930, in Germany, in a town called Fürth, which is a suburb of Nuremberg. And we lived there. When I was 2 years old, we moved to France because as Jews we were in danger because Hitler was elected in 1933 when I was 2 years old.
Oh, wow.
So my family decided to move to France, and then we lived in France in an area called Alsace, which at times that part of France belonged to Germany, and then other times it belonged to France. When there was a war, it kept changing hands. So the language spoken there was, the official language was French, but there was also a German dialect that they spoke. So it worked out for my family, and I started speaking French and German because that's what my parents decided to do. They didn't want me to forget German completely, but French became my language. And we lived there. Do you want me to go on?
Oh, yeah,
How
you
we
could
moved? Because we
go on.
moved around. I moved around a lot. We lived there till I was about 5. I started school there. And my parents decided to move to Paris because, first of all, I had aunts and uncles living in Paris at the time, and also they wanted to be near the American embassy in the consulate because they decided that they wanted to come to this country, and this way they would be close to where they had to be to go into all these different offices. So what happened then was that my father and I, who had both been born in Germany, we were allowed to come here. We received papers. We would have received papers, but my mother was not allowed. My mother was born in Poland, but she lived in Germany since from the age of 3 months old, so it was actually where she grew up. And so, no, this happened in this country often enough. We heard it recently about Mexicans who were not allowed to come here for a while. Anyway, so we were stuck in Europe during the whole war. And it's kind of an involved story. Life in Alsace actually was interesting, but I didn't realize that there was anything different about it. I remember that we didn't have electricity because I remember clearly there was an oil lamp on the table, and the bathroom was non-existent. There was an outhouse. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a little cabin in the outside, and it had a plank with a hole in the middle. That was our toilet. And I was, I was 2 when we moved there, so I didn't think there was anything wrong about this. But once we moved to Paris, things changed. We lived in an apartment. We actually lived in Montreuil, which is a suburb of Paris. And we kept trying to get papers to come here. I went to school. I played with my cousins because my aunts and uncles had children. And I wasn't conscious of any problems because my parents kept me well protected. So I was fine. I had friends. I enjoyed school. And I remember being so excited when we went to the library the first time to get me books. I thought it was the best thing that happened to me. I still think it is the best thing that happened to me. Uh, I still love reading, except that I can't read anymore, so I'm now listening to books, which is not the same thing. It's okay, but it's not the same thing. Anyway, when I was 8 years old, my father and mother took me aside and told me that I would have to be sent away, that there was a war coming. This was in 1939. It was the beginning of World War II. And I had to be sent away, and I was not happy about that. I was only 8 years old. In fact, I have a couple of pictures if you're interested in seeing them.
Oh yeah, I'd definitely be interested in that.
Yeah, shall I get them now?
Yeah, that would work.
Okay, this was my last school picture when I was 8 years old. My last school picture living with my parents. I never learned to read or write in German. I can make out words that I know, but French was my language.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was put on a train with a whole group of children who were being sent away from France, from Paris, mainly because of the war. But I didn't realize that as a Jew I was I was going to have problems also. Not until, by the time I was 9, I realized that I was really a serious problem for Jews. First of all, when we got to Switzerland, we were all taken in by different families. So I stayed with 3 different families in their homes. And I remember at one point it was almost like a summer vacation. I enjoyed myself, I found friends. And then the Swiss government sent us back to France. And we were not reunited with parents. I thought this was going to be the result, that when I came back I was going to see my parents again. But I didn't see my parents again for 4 years. So I left them when I was 8, and I was reunited with them when I was 12. So you can imagine that this is a very difficult period, and you're not the same child. You're not the same person altogether, because first of all, when you meet parents again after so many years of separation, you become estranged from them. And they had a hard time with me also, because they were not the same people. In between this, my father had been sent to a concentration camp in France, because France had many camps. And my mother was going to be arrested again, also by the French police to help the Germans. But she ran away. She actually climbed out of the window and managed to get into the next building and ran away that way. And I found out all this after I met my parents again. My father was put on a train that was taking him to another camp near Paris, from which people were taken to Auschwitz. but he escaped. He managed to get away. And when they found my mother, they arrested my mother to find out where my father was. They were looking for him. And they tortured my mother, and they beat her up. And she was never the same again. So when I met my parents, you can imagine how different they were and how different I was. And it was never again a normal life. And so eventually, I was in 3 different children's homes, which were like orphanages. So I lived all these years under the protection of an organization called OSE, that's OSE, and they took care of children of all ages. There were children there who were 2 and 3 years old, and there were teenagers also. And in between, I lived in many of these places because they kept moving us because of the fact that the bombing had started. At one point we were sleeping in the bomb shelters, and then they were trying to find places that we would be safe. So I have here one of the. Well, this is my parents.
Wow.
I have their wedding picture, which I stole from my aunt.
Where did they get married?
They were married in Germany. They were living in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
This was their home. This is one of the places that I live. I have friends who found pictures, so that's why I have so many pictures. These were my aunts and uncles and cousins. This is one of the places that we lived. It was about a 500-year-old chateau, and it was cold and it was empty, no furniture, so we slept on the floor. And this is the beginning of being hungry. Then this is one of the books that the director of this home, wrote a book also about how the children were treated and how we managed to survive. And this is the last place I was in. It's called Shaban. There was a documentary made about the children of Shaban, which is this place. I was there 3 years, 3 of my 4 years. And this pictures of the children. And there was one thing at the end I would like. Okay, this is after my father escaped from the camp. The difference in him, he's half the size. He was very sick. Those camps in France, people were not being killed, but they died because of malnourishment and illness. This is the documentary that is called The Children of Shaban. This is the ship with which I came to this country.
And what town did you live in when you came to the U.S.?
In Newark, because my relatives. Okay, this is important. I don't know if you can see it.
I can see it.
Yeah. Wow.
It's powerful.
And he added some of my paintings.
They're beautiful.
Yeah, they're really nice.
Thank
When
you.
did you get into painting?
My father was a commercial artist, and he was also a chess champion in Bavaria.
Ooh.
And so, as a little girl, I always felt that somehow I was going to do something in the arts. But I didn't, you know, the life I led wasn't conducive to being able to study, and not even, didn't always have paper available even. And when, after I was married and my son started school, I decided, why don't I just play around with drawing and painting a little bit on my own? And I was already in my 30s. That's when I also learned to drive, in my 30s. So I started painting on my own, and then I decided to take classes, and it just got bigger and bigger. And I've had a few shows locally.
Oh, wow.
I had one painting in a group show in New York,
Oh, cool.
which was interesting. And I am only sorry that because of my bad eyes, I can't do it anymore.
When did you stop painting?
Oh, maybe 2 years ago. At the beginning of the pandemic, I could still manage to paint somewhat, and then it got worse. So I miss it.
Yeah.
It was. So when I was reunited with my parents at the age of 12, they were in the south of France, in Nice, on the Riviera, because that part of France was occupied by the Italians. You know, Italy was in the war with Germany, on the side of Germany, and the Japanese. So the Italians, they had a reputation. People felt a little more secure with them, and that's why many people decided to go down to the south of France on the Riviera, which is where Nice is. And eventually, though, we were arrested by the Italian army, and they took us up into the Alps, into the French Alps, and we were put up in a village, it's called forced residence. We were not put in a camp, we were not put in jail, we were given little chalets, houses to live in. We had to fend for ourselves with food, but there was no work for anybody. Nobody worked, so there was really no money. We used to go begging the farmers. This was cheese-making country up in the mountains. They had goats and cows, and we managed to find potatoes all the time when we were feeling semi-safe. And eventually, when Italy left the war, Italy declared armistice in 1943, and they took us back into Italy, and that was a problem because we had to hide all over again. We were there's this book that was written that is called Out of the Fire. Well, we were back in the fire, out of the frying pan into the fire again. We had to hide again. And in Rome, we ended up in Rome. In Rome, there was a Catholic Capuchin monk who is well known. And actually, they honored him in Israel, and he saved literally thousands of Jews. And he helped us, and I ended up at one point having to be put in a Catholic convent, which was difficult because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I had to hide the fact that I was Jewish, and I had to participate in the prayers, which were Latin in those days. I don't know if you're Catholic or if you know anything about the Catholic religion, but years ago the prayers were Latin. And but most of us girls already started speaking Italian, which is kind of related, and we managed to learn the Latin prayers. And I still remember some of it. And we had to really participate and make believe that we're part of this group, and that we managed it. And I remember by 1944, we were about 6 or 8 girls who were friends of mine, who all came from France together, and we in this convent, and we shared a dormitory. The nuns knew that we were Jewish, but they tried hard to hide it from the other girls. So that's why they were teaching us how to say the prayers and go through all the motions that we had to, in order to hide the fact that we didn't know what we were doing. And they saved our life in a way. They were also among the people who saved our life. And the last night in the convent, we were up all night listening to bombing and shelling, because the US and British armies had already invaded Italy, the south of Italy, and they were trying to get to Rome. And on June the 4th, 1944, they got into Rome. And that's when we were told that we're free. The Germans ran away, the Germans had left, and we were free to come out. And my mother came to pick me up, and by herself. That's when I found out that my father had been arrested again, and this time I found out many years later through my cousin that he did escape again, but he was only free for 4 days. They caught him. When you're trying to escape, he had no money, and he was no clothing, no food, and unless you find somebody to help, people were afraid to help, obviously. And if you don't find somebody to help, then it's very difficult. So he didn't make it. We found out years later. I even have a sheet with a list of the people who were in the camp that he was in Germany. And it had his name, the date he arrived there, and the date he died. And I didn't find out all this till maybe 20 years ago. So all those years I kept wondering what happened. And our life, my mother and I were left alone, and the life was very difficult. Again, there was no work in Rome if you were Italian, and as foreigners, certainly not. Our relatives who were living in this country used to send packages, and one uncle sent money to pay rent, and so we managed to hold on. We didn't, we didn't live the high life for sure. We barely made it, and we didn't want to leave Rome because we didn't know what happened to my father. We really didn't know. And we thought if he comes back, this is the only place he knew that we were, and we wanted to stay there and wait. But of course he never came back, but they killed him. Anyway, at one point, my mother discovered one of her cousins we didn't know who was still alive of all our relatives, but we went to this building where they posted lists of people who had survived, and we went to look at those lists every day. And at one point I heard my mother start screaming, "I know those legs. And I thought to myself, what's going on? What is she talking about? Well, her cousin was walking down the stairs and we could see her legs.
Wow.
She was slightly bow-legged. And so this is how we met her. This is my mother's cousin, and she became like a mother to me, like a second mother. My mother was never the same after her beating and torture from the French. She was in really bad shape. And so having this cousin around was a big help. She had a job with the American Red Cross, which was nice because she had a little income. And there were shortages of food anyway, even if you had money. And we kept going for a while till my mother decided that this, I went to a school, I went back to school. There was a French school in Rome, and all my friends went to this school because, we couldn't go to an Italian school. We didn't know enough Italian to go to school, to a high school. So this was a French school. And I understand the school is still open now. So eventually my mother and Paula, the cousin, decided that maybe we should just leave Rome and come to this country. So my mother still was not allowed to come. They still refused her. After all these years and after going through the war with what was going on then, they would not let her come. But Paula and I were both German born, so we were okay. And my mother decided that I should go with Paula and come here. I would be staying. I had a few aunts and uncles living here, and they wanted us to come. So we took this ship that I showed you the picture of the ship.
Yeah.
This was we had third class accommodations in those days. That they still used first, second, and third class, and of course we had third class. They assigned a cabin as you got on board. It isn't that you reserved a place. And we had a cabin for 6, which was, anyway, we came here and I was living with one aunt, one of my great aunts, a stranger to me. they were all strangers to me. I didn't know anybody. And, I started high school because I had missed so many years of schooling during the war, during the time that I was roaming around from place to place. So Paula decided that I should, and my mother, we kept writing back and forth that I should at least get to high school. And some of my relatives were not too happy with that. They thought I shouldn't go to school. I should just get a job, but my mother wouldn't hear of that. It was ridiculous. Of course, I had to go to school. Anyway, I started high school without knowing any English, which was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
This was Wickwake High School in Newark. All my relatives were living in Newark at that time, so I had help from some teachers, but they were not all nice. They were not all helpful. Some of them had no patience with this kid who didn't know English very well. I learned a few words here and there, and eventually I picked it up. I went to the movies a lot, and that helped me.
Yeah.
I didn't have formal lessons in English. It just came. I don't know how. It just happened. But of course, it was my fourth language at this point. So, in Europe, most people speak more than one language anyway. I think in this country, not so much. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
not at all.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a hard time learning English. Maybe I didn't learn it well enough, but I learned it enough to be able to read anything I wanted to read, and it was okay. It wasn't I didn't find it difficult. I know that some people complain that English is hard. I didn't think so. English is actually related to two of the other languages that I knew, so it's just the pronunciation is different, but words may be written the same way. Anyway, I finished school and I met my husband, and we were married 57 years, and I have one son and grandchildren. My daughter-in-law, my first daughter-in-law passed away. She got sick, and then my son remarried, and my second daughter-in-law is a lovely woman, and her children and my grandchildren too. They're all grown. They're all grown up. They're all in their 20s.